The morning Earth died started like any other morning. Commander Daeho stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, drinking his coffee and watching the blue planet turn slowly below. He had been doing this job for 15 years now, protecting Earth from dangers that never came. Most days he wondered if his entire career was a waste. The galaxy ignored humanity and humanity returned the favor. That changed when the screens lit up with red warnings. Ships were coming. Big ships. More ships than Daeho had ever seen in his life. They appeared at the edge of the solar system like a swarm of metal insects, hundreds of them, all moving toward Earth with terrible purpose. Daeho dropped his coffee. The cup shattered on the floor, but he didn't notice. He was already running to the command center, shouting orders into his communicator. Every alarm in the station began screaming. People rushed to their positions. This was it. This was what they had trained for. This was what Daeho had secretly hoped would never actually happen. The alien fleet was beautiful in a terrible way. Their ships were massive, covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple light. Each vessel was 10 times larger than anything humans had built. They moved in perfect formation, like they had done this 1,000 times before. And they probably had. A message came through on all frequencies. The voice was deep and cold, speaking perfect English through a translator. It belonged to someone who called himself War Master Krell of the Velkrin Dominion. He said that Earth now belonged to the Velkrin. He said that humans should surrender immediately. He said that resistance would be crushed. He gave them 1 hour to decide. Daeho looked at the faces of his crew. They were scared. They had every right to be scared. The alien ships could probably destroy Earth with a single attack. But Daeho remembered something his grandfather once told him, back when he was a child listening to stories of old wars. His grandfather said that humans had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. They survived because they never stopped fighting. They survived because they adapted. Daeho opened a channel to all human ships and stations. His voice was calm and steady. He said one word, no. Then he gave the order to attack. The battle was a disaster. Human missiles exploded harmlessly against the alien shields. Human fighters were swatted from the sky like flies. The Velkrin weapons cut through human ships like they were made of paper. Within 20 minutes, half the defense fleet was destroyed. Luna Station shook as enemy fire hammered against its shields. Lieutenant Jiwan was in the hangar when the attack began. She was a fighter pilot, only 27 years old, with oil on her hands from working on her ship's engine. She watched the screens showing the battle outside and felt something cold settle in her stomach. They were losing. They were losing badly. But Jiwan had been taking apart and rebuilding machines since she was a child. She understood how things worked. And watching the Velkrin ships move, she noticed something. Their shields glowed brighter every time they were hit. That meant they were using energy. Energy had to come from somewhere. Energy could be disrupted. She ran to find Dr. Minho. He was in the research lab already working frantically on captured alien technology from a Velkrin probe they had found months ago. Nobody had paid much attention to it back then. Now it might be their only hope. Minho was a thin man with tired eyes who had spent his whole life studying alien species. He had always believed that humans and aliens could live in peace. He had written papers about cooperation and understanding. He had argued against building weapons. Now he was the one who had to figure out how to kill. Jiwan explained what she had seen. Minho listened, his fingers flying over his computer. He pulled up the data from the probe. His eyes went wide. She was right. The Velkrin shields operated on a specific frequency. If they could match that frequency and reverse it, they could create interference. The shields would collapse. The problem was time. They needed hours to modify the human weapons. The Velkrin would destroy Luna Station in minutes. Daeho made a decision. He ordered all remaining ships to retreat to the far side of the moon. It looked like they were running away. The Velkrin would think they had won, while the enemy fleet moved to surround Earth. Jiwan and her team worked like they had never worked before. They tore apart their weapons systems and rebuilt them with shaking hands. Minho stood over them, shouting numbers and equations. Daeho bought them time by sending false surrender messages, each one claiming technical difficulties were delaying their response. On Earth, billions of people watched the sky and waited to die. In the streets of Seoul, in the towers of New York, in the deserts of Australia, humans looked up and wondered if this was the end. Parents held their children. Lovers held each other. Soldiers loaded their guns even though they knew bullets would not stop starships. Captain Heejin was on Earth when the invasion began. She commanded a special forces unit trained for impossible missions. Now she had the most impossible mission of all. She gathered her best soldiers and told them they were going to board an alien ship. They looked at her like she was crazy. She smiled. Maybe she was. Using a small stealth shuttle, Heejin's team flew up to one of the Velkrin supply ships. It was smaller than the battleships, less protected. They attached to its hull and cut their way inside. The aliens inside were shocked. They had never expected humans to be stupid enough to board their ships. That surprise cost them their lives. Hyejin's team moved through the ship like ghosts, killing quickly and silently. They found what they were looking for in the cargo bay: food supplies, weapons, and most importantly, technical manuals. Hyejin grabbed everything she could carry and ran back to the shuttle. Alarms were screaming now. The Velkrin knew they were there. The shuttle barely escaped. Velkrin fighters chased them through space, firing bright purple beams. But Heejin was a better pilot than any alien. She twisted and turned, diving between pieces of destroyed human ships, using debris as cover. She made it back to Luna Station with her stolen prize. Minho took the technical manuals and read them as fast as he could. His hands were shaking, his heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. Yes, this was it. Now he understood exactly how their shields worked. Now he could break them. 6 hours after the invasion began, the human fleet emerged from behind the moon. They flew straight at the Velkrin formation. War Master Krell laughed when he saw them coming. These stupid humans were attacking again. He would destroy them all. Jiwon was flying the lead fighter. Her hands were steady on the controls. Her modified weapons were ready. She whispered a prayer to gods she didn't believe in. Then she fired. The human missiles hit the Velkrin battleship. For a moment nothing happened. Then the shields flickered. They glowed bright, brighter, too bright, and then they collapsed. The massive ship was suddenly naked, unprotected. Every human weapon fired at once. The Velkrin battleship exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from Earth. Pieces of it scattered across space. And in that moment, both sides understood that everything had changed. The humans were not helpless prey. They could adapt. They could learn. They could fight back. And most terrifying of all to the Velkrin, the humans were not afraid to die. War Master Krell stared at his screens in shock. One of his battleships was gone, destroyed by primitives who should have surrendered. He felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt afraid. Daeho watched the explosion and allowed himself a small smile. They had won this battle, but it was only one battle. The war had just begun. He opened a channel to all human forces and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. They wanted us to kneel. They wanted us to surrender. They thought we were weak. Let them think that. Let them come. We will show them what humans are made of. We will show them that Earth does not bow to anyone. All across the fleet, human voices began to chant. It was an old sound, a sound from ancient battlefields, a sound that their ancestors had made when they faced enemies with nothing but courage and determination. The war chant echoed through space, carried on every radio frequency. And somewhere far away, on worlds enslaved by the Velkrin, other species heard that sound and felt something stir in their hearts. Hope. 3 weeks after the first battle, Commander Daeho sat in his office and looked at the reports. The news was bad. The Velkrin had retreated to the edge of the solar system, but they were not leaving. More ships arrived every day. They were gathering strength for another attack. Earth could not survive another assault like the first one. Daeho made a decision that shocked everyone. He said they would not wait for the Velkrin to attack again. They would take the fight to the enemy. People thought he was crazy. The human fleet was tiny compared to the Velkrin. They barely had enough ships to defend Earth. How could they possibly attack? But Daho understood something important. Defense meant death. If they sat and waited, the Velcrin would eventually overwhelm them with numbers. The only chance for survival was to hit the enemy where they were weak. Make them worry about their own worlds. Force them to divide their forces. Captain Hyagin volunteered to lead the first strike. She took 5 ships, all small and fast, loaded with her best soldiers. Their target was a Velcrin supply depot in the Proxima Centauri system, just 4 light-years away. Intelligence said the depot was lightly defended. The Velcrin never expected anyone to be stupid enough to attack them. The journey took 2 days through faster-than-light travel. When they arrived, Hyagin saw that intelligence was right. Only 3 Velcrin ships guarded the depot, and they looked bored. They were not expecting trouble. That was their mistake. Hyagin attacked fast and hard. Her ships came out of FTL right on top of the enemy, weapons already firing. The Velcrin guards died before they could send a warning. Within minutes, human soldiers were boarding the depot, moving through its corridors with deadly efficiency. What they found inside made Hyagin sick to her stomach. The depot was not just storing supplies. It was storing slaves, hundreds of them, from species Hyagin had never seen before. They were thin and scared, covered in bruises, locked in cages like animals. Some had been there for years. They stared at the humans with empty eyes, too broken to feel hope. Hyagin wanted to free them all, but she did not have enough ships to take them back to Earth. Instead, she did something else. She gave them weapons. She showed them how to use the Velcrin communication system. She told them that help was coming, that they did not have to be slaves anymore, that they could fight back. Before leaving, Hyajin's team took everything valuable from the depot: ships, weapons, food, and most importantly, data files containing information about Velcrin military operations. As her ships jumped away, she triggered the depot's self-destruct sequence. The explosion lit up the system like a new sun. Among the data files was something unexpected. A message from a Velcrin officer named Commander Vex. He had hidden it in the system, hoping someone would find it. The message said he wanted to defect. He said he was tired of the killing. He said the Velcrin Empire was wrong. He offered to provide information in exchange for protection. When Daiho received this message, he did not trust it. It could be a trap. The Velcrin might be trying to lure humans into an ambush, but the information Vex offered was too valuable to ignore. Daiho decided to take the risk. He sent Hyagin to meet with the defector. The meeting happened on a dead moon in neutral space. Hyagin brought her best soldiers and kept her weapons ready. Commander Vex arrived in a small ship, alone and unarmed. He was tall and covered in dark scales that reflected the starlight. His eyes were yellow and sad. Vex told them everything. He explained how the Velcrin military worked, where their bases were located, which routes their supply ships used. He revealed that the Galactic Council knew about the invasion but chose to do nothing. They wanted to see if humans were strong enough to defend themselves. If humans survived, they might be allowed to join the galactic community. If they died, well, one less species to worry about. Most importantly, Vex told them about War Master Krell's flagship. It was called the Death of Stars, and it was the most powerful ship in the Velcrin fleet. Krell never left his flagship. If they could destroy it, the Velcrin invasion would fall apart. Hyagin asked Vex why he was betraying his own people. The alien commander was quiet for a long time. Then he said that what the Velcrin were doing was not honorable. They had become monsters. He had seen too many innocent people die. He could not be part of it anymore. Even if his own people called him a traitor, even if he could never go home, he would do what was right. Back on Earth, Lieutenant Jiwan was working on a new project. The modified weapons had worked once, but the Velcrin were adapting. They were changing their shield frequencies. She needed something better, something the enemy could not defend against. Dr. Minho had an idea. He had been studying the way Velcrin soldiers fought. They were enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them faster and stronger than normal humans. But those implants were also a weakness. They all operated on similar neural frequencies. If he could create a device that disrupted those frequencies, it would scramble the implants. The Velcrin soldiers would be helpless. Minho worked day and night on the neural disruptor. He felt guilty about creating weapons, but he told himself this was different. This weapon did not kill. It just disabled. That made it better somehow. At least that was what he told himself when he could not sleep at night. Meanwhile, Daiho was planning the biggest operation of the war. Using Vex's information, he identified a weakness in the Velcrin defense. There was a space station called Proxima Station that served as a supply hub for the entire invasion fleet. If they could capture or destroy it, the Velcrin would have to retreat to resupply. That would give Earth time to prepare better defenses. The plan was risky. Proxima Station was heavily defended with dozens of ships and thousands of soldiers. The attack would require every available human vessel. If they failed, Earth would be defenseless. But Deho believed they had no choice. Sometimes you had to gamble everything to win. The human fleet gathered in secret, hiding behind a gas giant where Velcrin sensors could not detect them. Every ship was prepared. Every weapon was loaded. Every soldier knew this might be their last battle. They recorded final messages to their families. They made their peace with death. Jiwon stood in the hangar with her fighter squadron. She was now a commander, promoted after the first battle. Her pilots looked young and scared. She gave them a speech she had prepared. She told them they were making history. She told them that future generations would remember this day. She told them to fight with everything they had. What she did not tell them was that she was just as scared as they were. She hid it behind confidence and smiles. That was what leaders did. The attack began at dawn, Earth time. The human fleet jumped into the Proxima system and found the station exactly where Vex said it would be. Velcrin ships immediately moved to intercept, but Hyejin was already there with her special forces. She had infiltrated the station hours earlier, disguised as a cargo ship. Now her teams were inside, sabotaging defenses and causing chaos. The battle was the largest space combat humans had ever fought. Ships exploded on both sides. Fighters twisted and turned between tracers of energy. The station's guns fired constantly, but half of them were disabled by Hyejin's sabotage. Jiwon led her squadron through impossible maneuvers, destroying enemy ships with precise strikes. On the station, Hyejin fought through corridors filled with Velcrin soldiers. She activated Minho's neural disruptor, and the alien warriors collapsed, their enhanced implants failing. It worked perfectly. Her team pushed forward to the command center. The Velcrin commander of the station fought to the end. He would not surrender. Hyejin respected that, even as she shot him. Warriors understood each other, even across species. With the command center captured, Hyejin broadcast a message on all frequencies. She told every Velcrin soldier on the station to surrender or die. Most of them chose to surrender. They were soldiers, not fanatics. They knew when they were beaten. The remaining Velcrin ships retreated. Deho watched them go and felt something like satisfaction. They had won. Proxima Station was theirs. The Velcrin invasion force would have to pull back for resupply. Earth had breathing room, but the cost had been high. 20 human ships were destroyed. Hundreds of soldiers dead. Jiwon had lost half her squadron. She sat in her fighter after the battle and cried for the friends she would never see again. News of the victory spread fast. On Earth, people celebrated in the streets. But more importantly, the news reached other species. The slaves in Velcrin-controlled systems heard that someone was fighting back. They heard that the mighty Velcrin could be defeated. They heard the human war chant that Jiwon broadcast during the battle. And in the darkness between stars, in hidden places where hope had died long ago, that war chant began to echo. Other voices joined in. The first sparks of rebellion began to glow. Lieutenant Jiwon started recording her missions by accident. Her fighter's camera was always running during combat, standard procedure for analyzing tactics afterward. But one day she decided to add sound. She recorded herself talking while she fought, explaining what she was doing and why. She added music from Earth, old battle songs from different cultures. At the end, she included the war chant that human forces had started using. She uploaded the recording to the military network, thinking maybe other pilots would find it useful. Instead, someone leaked it to public channels. Within hours, millions of people across Earth were watching. Within days, it had spread beyond the solar system, carried by civilian ships and bounced off communication satellites. Within weeks, species across the galaxy were watching humans fight. The recordings were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Most species fought wars with cold efficiency, following strict protocols. Humans fought with emotion. They shouted and cursed. They made jokes even when death was seconds away. They flew their ships like they were dancing. And that chant, that primal sound of defiance, it touched something deep in every species that heard it. On a mining world called Cathara, Slaves who had worked in darkness for years huddled around a smuggled radio and listened to Jiwan's broadcasts. They heard her laugh as she destroyed a Velcrin battleship. They heard her cry out in triumph. They heard the war chant. And for the first time in longer than they could remember, they felt something other than despair. One of them, an old mechanic whose name had been taken away years ago, began to hum the chant quietly. Others joined in. Soon the entire mineshaft echoed with the sound. The Velcrin guards heard it and felt fear. They had never heard their slaves make any sound except pain. On Earth, Ambassador Sora received a message that changed everything. It came from someone called Scholar Thalen of the Ashara Collective. The Ashara were an ancient species of historians who rarely interfered in galactic affairs. They watched and recorded nothing more. But Thalen said he had been watching humanity's war, and he wanted to help. Thalen arranged for Sora to speak before the Galactic Council. It was unprecedented. Humanity had never been allowed to address the Council before. They were considered too primitive, too violent, too young. But Thalen had influence, and he used all of it to open this door. Sora prepared her speech carefully. She knew this might be her only chance to make humanity's case. She stood before the council, a chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of species. Some looked at her with curiosity. Most looked at her with contempt. She did not let that shake her. She began by thanking them for allowing her to speak. Then she asked them a simple question. How many species had the Velcrin conquered while the council watched and did nothing? How many billions of people were enslaved while the council debated and delayed? How many worlds had burned while the council protected its own interests? The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some council members shouted that she had no right to criticize. Others demanded she be removed. But Sora kept talking, her voice cutting through the noise. She said humanity was not asking for membership. Humanity was not asking for help. Humanity was demanding that the council do its job and stop the Velcrin Empire before more innocent people died. She played Jiwan's recordings for the council. She showed them images of the freed slaves from Proxima Station. She told them about Commander Vex, a Velcrin who chose honor over loyalty to his empire. She made the council see what they had been ignoring, and some of them at least felt shame. The speech did not change everything immediately. The council was too old, too set in its ways. But it planted seeds. Minor species who had suffered under great power politics began to speak up. A few council members started questioning the old agreements that protected empires like the Velcrin. Sora had opened a crack in the wall. Meanwhile, Dr. Minho completed his greatest achievement. The neural disruptor had worked well, but it only affected Velcrin cybernetics. He wanted something that could help against any enemy. He created a portable shield generator small enough for soldiers to carry. It would not stop heavy weapons, but it would protect against small arms fire and shrapnel. It could save lives. The first test of the new shield happened on Cathara. The slaves there had finally revolted, inspired by G1's broadcasts. They killed their guards and seized control of the mines. But Velcrin reinforcements were coming. The rebels would be slaughtered unless someone helped them. Captain Heejin volunteered to lead the rescue mission. She took 3 ships filled with soldiers and medical supplies. They arrived at Cathara just as Velcrin dropships were landing. The battle that followed was brutal and close. Humans and freed slaves fought side by side against Velcrin soldiers. The portable shield saved dozens of lives. Human soldiers could advance under fire, protecting themselves and the rebels they were rescuing. Minho watched the battle reports from Earth and felt something he had not felt in months. Pride. His inventions were saving lives, not just taking them. The liberation of Cathara took 3 days. In the end, the Velcrin retreated. 15,000 slaves were freed. They looked at their human rescuers with tears in their eyes. Many of them asked to join the fight. Heejin did not turn them away. She gave them weapons and trained them. The resistance was growing. Commander Deho watched all of this from Luna Station and saw the bigger picture forming. They were not just fighting a war anymore. They were starting a movement. Every victory inspired more rebellions. Every broadcast of the war chant reached more oppressed people. The Velcrin Empire was beginning to crack, but War Master Krell was not finished. He watched his empire crumbling and decided to do something drastic. He sent a message to the Velcrin High Command, asking for permission to use the planet killer weapon. It was a device banned by galactic law, capable of destroying entire worlds. The High Command hesitated. Using such a weapon would turn the entire galaxy against them. Krell argued that an example needed to be made. If they destroyed Earth, it would show every other species what happened to those who resisted. Fear would restore order. After days of debate, the High Command agreed. They were desperate. Their empire was falling apart. They needed to do something dramatic. Commander Vex learned about the plan through his contacts in the Velcrin military. He immediately warned Daiho. Earth had perhaps 2 weeks before the planet killer arrived. The device was being transported in secret, heavily guarded. Destroying it would be nearly impossible. Daiho called an emergency meeting of all human leadership. The situation was desperate. They could try to evacuate Earth, but there was nowhere to go. They could hide and hope the Velcrin never found them, but that was not survival, it was just delayed death. Or they could attack. Daiho proposed the most insane plan anyone had ever heard. While the Velcrin were focused on bringing the planet killer to Earth, humanity would strike at the Velcrin homeworld. It was protected by massive defenses, but those defenses would be weakened if most of the fleet was away. It was a desperate gamble, but they had no other choice. The plan required almost every human ship. It meant leaving Earth nearly defenseless. If they failed, humanity would be extinct within days. But if they succeeded, they could force the Velcrin to call off the planet killer to defend their own world. Jiwan would lead the fighter squadrons. Hejin would lead the ground assault teams. Vex would guide them through Velcrin space, and Daiho would command the fleet. They began preparing immediately. Every ship was armed. Every soldier was briefed. Everyone knew this was their last chance. Before they left, Jiwan made one final broadcast. She stood in front of her fighter, looking tired but determined. She spoke to everyone watching, human and alien alike. She said they were about to do something that would echo through history. She said they were going to show the galaxy that tyranny would not be tolerated. She said they were going to win or die trying. And then she began the war chant, and every human voice joined her. The sound echoed across every frequency, broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. On thousands of worlds, oppressed people heard it and felt their hearts beat faster. On the Velcrin homeworld, citizens heard it and felt fear for the first time. And in the darkness of space, the human fleet began its journey toward destiny. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what would happen when the humans arrived. The human fleet traveled through dark space for 6 days. It was the largest force humanity had ever assembled. 50 warships, 100 fighters, 5,000 soldiers. Against the defenses of the Velcrin homeworld, it looked like nothing. But Commander Daiho had learned that numbers were not everything. Surprise was everything. Commander Vex guided them through hidden routes that Velcrin patrols never used. He knew his people's habits, their blind spots, their overconfidence. The Velcrin had not been invaded in 200 years. They had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. During the journey, Daiho barely slept. He studied maps of the Velcrin homeworld, memorizing every defense station, every shipyard, every military base. He knew they could not conquer the planet. That was not the goal. The goal was to cause enough damage that the Velcrin would panic and call back their fleet, including the ship carrying the planet killer. Lieutenant Jiwan spent the journey checking every fighter personally. She talked to every pilot, learned their names, tried to remember their faces. Too many of them would not survive. She knew that. They knew that. But nobody spoke about it. Captain Hejin trained her soldiers until they moved like one organism. They practiced boarding actions, urban combat, sabotage techniques. She pushed them hard because she wanted them to survive. Every drop of sweat in training was blood saved in battle. That was what she told herself. On the 6th day, they arrived at the edge of the Velcrin home system. Daiho looked at the planet on his screens. It was beautiful, covered in purple oceans and green continents. Billions of Velcrin lived there, most of them civilians who had nothing to do with the war. He felt a moment of doubt. What gave him the right to bring war to their homes? Then he remembered Earth burning. He remembered the slaves on Cathara. He remembered that the Velcrin were coming to kill his entire species. Doubt disappeared. He gave the order to attack. The human fleet came out of faster-than-light travel right in the middle of Velcrin space. Alarms screamed across the planet. Defense stations powered up their weapons. Warships scrambled to launch. But they were too slow. The humans had complete surprise. Jiwan led her fighters straight at the orbital defense platforms. Her modified weapons tore through their shields. Explosions blossomed in space like deadly flowers. She laughed as she flew, not because it was funny, but because she was alive and her enemies were dying. In battle, there was a terrible kind of joy. Hyejin's dropships descended toward the surface. Their target was a military command center on the largest continent. If they could capture or destroy it, the entire planetary defense network would be crippled. Velcrin fighters pursued them, but human ships provided cover. The dropships made it through. The landing was rough. 2 dropships were destroyed by ground fire. Hyejin's ship crashed into a building, and she led her soldiers out into a war zone. Velcrin military forces were everywhere. The humans were outnumbered 50-1, but they had Dr. Minho's weapons and portable shields, and they had something else. They had fought this kind of battle before, in humanity's long history of warfare. The Velcrin had not. Hyejin's team fought through the streets toward the command center. They used buildings for cover, turned corners into kill zones, set traps that the enemy walked into blindly. Every human soldier was worth 10 Velcrin because they knew how to fight smart, not just strong. But the cost was terrible. Soldiers fell one by one. Good people, brave people, people with families waiting at home. Hyejin watched them die and kept moving forward because stopping meant failing. And failing meant Earth died. She pushed the grief away and became a machine, efficient and deadly. They reached the command center after 2 hours of fighting. It was a massive fortress of metal and stone. Velcrin defenders poured fire down on them from every direction. Hyejin looked at her remaining soldiers. 30 people left from the 200 who landed. Not enough. Not nearly enough. She made a decision. She told her soldiers to fall back and provide covering fire. She would go in alone. They protested, but she did not give them a choice. She activated her personal shield, grabbed as many explosives as she could carry, and ran straight at the command center. Velcrin weapons hit her shield again and again. It flickered and weakened, but held. She reached the wall and began placing charges. Bullets sparked around her. Her shield failed. She felt something hot punch through her side. Pain exploded, but she kept working. Almost done. Just a few more seconds, the charges were set. Hyejin activated them and tried to run. Her legs would not work properly. Too much blood. She fell and looked up at the sky. It was purple here, not blue like Earth's. Strange. She had never noticed that before. She opened her communicator one last time. She could hear Daeho shouting her name, demanding a status report. She smiled, always so serious. She told him the mission was complete. She told him to get everyone out. Then she did something that surprised her. She began singing the war chant. Her voice was weak and broken, but she sang it anyway. The command center exploded. The blast was so large it could be seen from space. Every defense system on the planet went dark. Velcrin ships stopped receiving orders. Confusion spread through their forces. Daeho heard Hyejin's chant cut off suddenly. He knew what that meant. He wanted to scream, to rage, to cry. But he was a commander. He had a job to do. He gave the order to retreat. The human fleet began pulling back, fighting all the way. Jiwon covered the retreat, her fighters dancing between enemy ships. She had heard Hyejin's final transmission. Tears ran down her face as she flew, but her hands were steady. She would mourn later. Now she had to make sure Hyejin's sacrifice meant something. The human fleet jumped away just as massive Velcrin reinforcements arrived. They had caused incredible damage. 3 orbital stations destroyed. The command center gone. Hundreds of ships damaged or destroyed. Most importantly, they had proven that the Velcrin homeworld was not safe. The news of the attack spread across the galaxy within hours. The Velcrin High Command panicked. Their homeworld was under threat. They immediately recalled their fleets, including the ship carrying the planet killer. Earth was saved. The trap had worked, but the victory felt hollow. The human fleet had lost 20 ships. 2,000 soldiers were dead, including Captain Hyejin. Daeho stood in his office and finally allowed himself to feel the loss. Hyejin had served under him for 10 years. She had saved his life twice. She had been one of the best soldiers he had ever known. And now she was gone. Across the human fleet, soldiers gathered to remember their fallen. They played recordings of Hyejin's final moments. Her war chant echoed through every ship. People wept openly. She had given everything so that others could live. That was what heroes did. The recording spread beyond the human fleet. Other species heard Hyejin's last stand. They heard her chant even as she faced death. It became a symbol. Suddenly, rebellions erupted on a dozen Velcrin-controlled worlds. The oppressed people had seen that the Velcrin could bleed. They had seen that sacrifice had meaning. They rose up. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. They could no longer ignore what was happening. The Velcrin Empire was collapsing. Species that had been silent for decades were now demanding action. Ambassador Sora received another invitation to speak. This time the council actually listened. War Master Krell watched his empire fall apart. He had lost half his fleet. His homeworld was damaged. Rebellions were breaking out everywhere. And it was all because of humans. These primitive creatures who should have died in the first attack. He felt something he had never felt before. Respect. The humans were worthy enemies, but respect would not save his empire. He made a decision. He would take his remaining fleet to Earth and destroy it personally. No planet killer, no tricks. Just a straightforward battle. If he won, the rebellion would lose its inspiration. If he lost, at least he would die fighting. The Velcrin fleet began moving toward Earth. It was still massive, still dangerous. But it was no longer invincible. The humans had proven that. And as Krell's ships traveled through space, they encountered something unexpected. Other species were joining the humans. The freed slaves from Cathara brought their ships. Minor members of the Galactic Council sent support. Even some Velcrin officers defected, following Commander Vex's example. A coalition was forming. Humanity had started it, but now it was bigger than just one species. The final battle was coming. Everyone knew it. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see which side would win, the old empire of fear and conquest or the new alliance of freedom and resistance. Everything would be decided in the skies above Earth. The Velcrin fleet arrived at Earth 2 weeks after the attack on their homeworld. War Master Krell commanded from his flagship, the Death of Stars. It was the largest warship ever built, covered in weapons that could destroy cities with a single shot. Around it flew 300 ships carrying the last of the Velcrin military might. Against them stood the human defense fleet and their new allies. Commander Deho watched the enemy approach and felt surprisingly calm. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. Win or lose, this battle would decide the fate of not just Earth but the entire galaxy. The old order was dying. What would replace it depended on what happened in the next few hours. The coalition fleet was diverse. Human ships flew alongside vessels from a dozen other species. They did not have standard tactics or unified command structures. They came from different cultures with different ways of thinking. Deho realized this could be their greatest strength. The Velcrin expected order and predictability. They would get chaos and creativity instead. Lieutenant Jiwan was now Admiral Jiwan, promoted after so many officers had died. She commanded all fighter operations. Standing on the bridge of her flagship, she looked at the screens showing hundreds of pilots waiting for orders. So many young faces, so many people who trusted her to lead them well. She would not let them down. The battle began when Krell sent a final message. He said that humans had proven themselves worthy opponents. He said he respected their courage, but respect would not save them. The Velcrin would finish what they started. Then he gave the order to attack. The Velcrin fleet came forward in perfect formation, weapons blazing. The coalition fleet scattered in all directions, breaking into small groups that attacked from every angle. It looked like panic. It looked like the coalition was falling apart. That was exactly what Deho wanted Krell to think. The Velcrin ships tried to maintain formation, but the coalition forces refused to fight in predictable ways. Human fighters dove between capital ships targeting weak points. Alien vessels from Cathara used ramming tactics, sacrificing themselves to damage larger enemies. Ships commanded by defected Velcrin officers like Commander Vex knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Jiwan led a squadron of 50 fighters straight at the Death of Stars. It seemed like suicide. The flagship's weapons could destroy them all in seconds. But Jiwan had studied that ship for weeks. She knew it had blind spots near its engines. She dove into those blind spots and her fighters followed like a swarm of angry insects. They planted bombs on the hull, tiny explosives that would not normally damage such a large ship. But Jiwan had learned from Dr. Minho. It was not about the size of the explosion. It was about where you placed it. The bombs detonated simultaneously and the flagship's main engines failed. The Death of Stars was dead in space. Krell felt his ship shudder and knew immediately what had happened. Clever. Very clever. He almost smiled. These humans fought like warriors from legends. If circumstances were different, he would have been proud to fight alongside them instead of against them. But circumstances were what they were. He ordered his fleet to protect the flagship while repairs were made. The Velcrin ships formed a defensive sphere, but this left them vulnerable to the coalition's hit-and-run tactics. Ship after ship fell to coordinated attacks. The perfect Velcrin formation became a death trap. Deho watched the battle unfold according to his plan. The Velcrin were masters of conventional warfare. But this was not conventional warfare. This was humanity's specialty, learned through thousands of years of fighting each other. Adaptation, improvisation, controlled chaos. The Velcrin had never faced anything like it. The battle raged for 8 hours. Ships exploded on both sides. Thousands of people died with each passing minute. The space around Earth became a graveyard of metal and bodies. But slowly, steadily, the Velcrin formation collapsed. Krell sat in his command chair and watched his empire die. More than half his fleet was destroyed. His flagship was crippled. Reinforcements would never arrive because there were no reinforcements left. The Velcrin dominion was finished. 200 years of conquest, ended by a species that was supposed to be primitive. A transmission came through from Commander Deho. He offered Krell a chance to surrender. The War Master laughed. Surrender was not in his vocabulary. He had lived by the sword. He would die by the sword. He gave his final order for his remaining ships to ram the enemy, to cause as much damage as possible before the end. Then Krell walked to his personal fighter in the flagship's hangar. If he was going to die, it would be in combat, not sitting in a chair. He launched into space alone, flying straight at the Coalition fleet. His weapons blazed. He destroyed 3 fighters before a missile from Jiwon's squadron hit his ship. The explosion was bright and brief. War Master Krell died doing what he had always done, fighting. In a strange way, Deho respected that. The enemy commander had been wrong about many things, but he had never been a coward. With Krell dead, the remaining Velcrin ships surrendered. The battle was over. The Coalition had won. Earth was safe. All across the human fleet, people began to cheer. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had survived. But Deho did not cheer. He looked at the casualty reports and felt only sadness. The Coalition had lost 40 ships, 5,000 soldiers dead, 5,000 people who would never go home. The cost of victory was always paid in blood. The Galactic Council met 1 week after the battle. This time they met not to debate but to act. The old council was dissolved. A new charter was written, one that emphasized mutual defense and protection of all species. Aggressive expansion was banned. Enslaved populations were to be freed immediately. Any empire that violated these rules would face the combined might of the entire galaxy. Ambassador Sora helped write the charter. She made sure it included provisions for young species, for diplomatic resolution of conflicts, for sharing technology and knowledge. The galaxy would be different now. Not perfect, but better. That was all anyone could ask for. Humanity was granted full membership in the new council. More than that, they were recognized as one of the founding species of the new galactic order. The species that had been ignored and dismissed was now respected. It had been earned with courage and blood. On Earth, construction began on a memorial in orbit. It was a ring of metal and crystal that would orbit the planet forever, visible from the surface. Names were inscribed on it. Every human who died in the war. Every alien ally who fought beside them. Captain Hyejin's name was first, carved in letters 10 meters tall. Dr. Minho attended the memorial dedication ceremony. He stood among thousands of people and looked up at the ring shining in the sunlight. His inventions had killed many, but they had also saved many. He still did not know if that balanced out. Perhaps it never would, but he had made a promise to himself. From now on, his work would be only for peace. Commander Vex was there too. The Velcrin defector had been instrumental in rebuilding his species' society. The Velcrin dominion was gone, but the Velcrin people remained. They needed to learn a new way of living. Vex dedicated his life to teaching them. It would take generations, but he believed they could change. Admiral Jiwon gave the main speech at the dedication. She spoke about sacrifice and courage. She spoke about unity and hope. But mostly she spoke about the price of freedom. It was never free. It cost blood and tears in the lives of good people. The names on the memorial represented that cost. They should never be forgotten. Then she did something that made everyone present cry. She began the war chant. Her voice was strong and clear. One by one, every person there joined in. Humans and aliens together, singing the sound that had become a symbol of resistance across the galaxy. The chant echoed across Earth and out into space, carried by radio waves toward the stars. On distant worlds, people heard the chant and remembered what it meant. It meant that tyranny could be defeated. It meant that even the smallest voice mattered. It meant that freedom was worth fighting for. The sound resonated through the galaxy like a promise. Never again would the strong be allowed to prey on the weak without consequence. Commander Deho stood at the back of the crowd during the ceremony. He was old now, tired from years of war. He would retire soon, let younger people lead. But first he wanted to see this. He wanted to remember why they had fought. Looking at the memorial at all those names, he felt both sorrow and pride. Humanity had earned its place among the stars. Not through conquest or domination, but through courage and sacrifice. They had shown the galaxy that there was a different way, a better way. And though the cost had been terrible, Daiho believed it had been worth it. After the ceremony, Jiwon walked alone to her ship. She was heading out tomorrow, leading an exploration mission to uncharted regions of space. There was so much to discover, so many new worlds to see. The war was over. Now came the harder task of building something lasting from the ruins. She looked back at Earth one last time. The blue planet turned slowly, peaceful and beautiful. Hard to believe it had nearly died. Hard to believe that a few months ago, humanity was facing extinction. They had survived. They had won. And now they would help make sure no other species ever had to face what they had faced.